Hello, listeners. Thank you so much for your support and for listening. You mean so much to us. Now, lovelies, on to the story. The house stood empty. Cold settled in its bones. No warmth came from the hearth. Dust motes danced in pale moonlight. They settled on forgotten tools, tools of a trade most would not name. The Warrens were gone. Their passing was quiet, too quiet for the work they did. The world did not truly understand. It did not grasp the shield they had been. Now that shield lay shattered. A hollow echo remained. The silence was a scream unheard by most. Their artifacts lay dormant. Each object pulsed with a contained darkness, or perhaps a trapped scream. Lorraine's rosaries were still. Ed's crucifixes gathered shadows. The air in their museum was thick. It was heavy with unseen presences. These entities stirred now. They sensed the absence of their jailers. A subtle vibration hummed through the floorboards. It was a new, predatory anticipation. The Guardians slept their final sleep. The wards they wove began to fray. Threads of protection snapped one by one. No one came to check the locks. No one renewed the ancient seals. The knowledge they held died with them. Buried secrets, forbidden rites, the methods to push back the dark, all gone. The world, blissfully ignorant, continued its dance. It spun towards a precipice, a cliff edge they could no longer see. The Warrens had been the watchtowers. They had been the lighthouse keepers. Now, the light was extinguished. The shoreline was dark and treacherous. A chill wind snaked through the empty rooms. It was not a natural wind. It carried whispers from places best left unnamed. It caressed the relics. It tested the fading boundaries. The house itself seemed to mourn, or perhaps it shivered in fear. It knew what was coming. It had been a bulwark against the abyss. Now it was just a house. Old wood and fading paint. A tomb for secrets. A future hunting ground for what lay beyond. Beyond the veil of human senses, something stirred. Not a creature of flesh, not a spirit of the departed. It was an elemental. A being woven from the raw fabric of existence. It felt the shift keenly, a discordant note in the symphony of creation. The Warrens' passing was a tremor, a rupture in the protective skin of the world. This elemental, ancient and vast, perceived it all. It felt the weakening of the barriers. It knew the old seals were failing. It had no name humans would recognize. It had no form they could comprehend. It existed in the spaces between, in the breath of the wind, in the flicker of a dying flame, in the cold depths of the earth. For eons, it had observed. It had felt the ebb and flow of energies, the constant silent war between orders. The Warrens had been a significant weight. They tipped the scales towards a fragile peace. Their absence was a gaping void, a vacuum inviting horrors to rush in. The elemental felt a disquiet, not an emotion like human fear, more a cosmic imbalance, a deep, resonant wrongness. The universe had rules, lines that should not be crossed. The Warrens had understood these lines. They had enforced them with their lives. Now those lines were blurring. The elemental sensed the pressure from outside, from dimensions hungry and cold. It felt the scratching at the doors. Tiny at first, growing bolder. Its awareness was a network, a web of subtle perceptions. It tasted the change in the psychic atmosphere. A metallic tang of fear, a sour note of corruption. These were not of this world. They were leaking through. The elemental knew the signs. It had seen such incursions before, ages ago, when worlds died screaming. It had no love for humanity, but it abhorred the chaos, the utter, devouring chaos that was poised to spill forth. Its existence was order, and this was the antithesis. The first signs were subtle, so subtle they were easily dismissed. A flicker in the corner of an eye, a sound just beyond hearing. The air grew colder in certain places, places once considered safe. Animals became skittish. Dogs whined at empty doorways. Cats arched their backs at unseen threats. Their senses, sharper than human ones, picked up the wrongness, the unnatural vibrations, the scent of something alien and predatory in the wind. These were the first tears. Lights in desolate places flickered and died, street lamps on lonely roads, porch lights of isolated homes. They sputtered out, plunging areas into deeper shadow. Sometimes a strange luminescence would follow, a pale, sickly green or a bruised violet. It danced where it should not. It hinted at energies not of this earth. These were the pinpricks, the initial breaches in the thinning wall between worlds. The elemental felt each one like a needle prick, a violation of the natural order. People reported vivid nightmares, dreams of impossible geometries, of endless corridors and whispering voices. They woke with a lingering dread, a cold sweat that was hard to shake. The dreams were not mere dreams, they were echoes from the other side. The minds of sleepers were vulnerable. They were fertile ground for the first tendrils of influence. The elemental knew. It felt the psychic membrane thinning, the barrier of collective sanity wearing thin. A faint smell began to permeate certain areas, ozone and something else, something like burnt sugar and decay. It was a smell that unsettled the stomach, that made the hairs on the arm stand up. It was the perfume of the outer dark, the breath of entities that should not be. The portals were not yet gaping maws. They were hairline fractures. But through these tiny cracks, the essence of the other side was seeping, a slow poison, a promise of horrors yet to unfold. The elemental began its work, its warning. It could not speak in human tongues. Its voice was the storm. Its words were the shifting earth. It tried to communicate the rising danger. It sent visions, flashes of terrifying futures. These visions came in dreams. They came in moments of quiet reflection. People saw glimpses, broken images of tearing flesh, of eyes that burned with cold fire. Most dismissed them, products of stress, too much bad news. It manipulated reflections. A face in a mirror would twist for a second. Its eyes would not be their own. A fleeting glimpse of something other. Something that looked back with ancient hunger. Shop windows would show scenes not happening on the street. Dark figures moving in the periphery. These were not tricks of light. They were windows. Brief, horrifying windows. The elemental screamed through these subtle distortions. But humanity was blind. It chose to be blind. Sounds came on the wind, not just whispers, but fragments of speech, in languages that had never been spoken on Earth. They echoed in old buildings. They sighed through telephone lines. Radios crackled with static. And within the static, voices, calling, promising, threatening. The elemental pushed these sounds through. It amplified the leaking chorus of the damned, hoping someone, anyone, would understand, hoping the pattern would be seen, the rising tide of the unnatural. Nature itself became its canvas. Trees bled a dark sap. Stones arranged themselves in unsettling patterns. Flocks of birds flew in spirals that defied logic. These were signs, omens. The elemental used the very world to paint its warning, but people saw only oddities, quirks of nature. They rationalized. They explained away. The fear was there, a low hum beneath the surface of their thoughts. But they did not connect the dots. They did not see the approaching storm. The elemental felt a cosmic despair. The Warrens had understood such signs. They had read the language of the unnatural. Their lives were a testament to this grim knowledge. They knew the rituals, the names to invoke, the symbols that repelled. This wisdom was hard-won, paid for in scars, both seen and unseen. It was chronicled in their journals, locked away in their forbidden library. Now those journals were mere paper. The library, a collection of sealed tombs. The keys were lost. Their methods were specific, tailored to fight the entities that clawed at the edges of reality. They knew which demon recoiled from which prayer, which entity feared which sacred object. This was not general faith. It was specialized warfare, a science of the damned. Without them, humanity was like an army facing a new weapon with no defense, no strategy, only confusion and a dawning terror. The old maps to hell were gone. People tried to find answers. They turned to old myths, to half-remembered folklore. But these were pale imitations, corrupted fragments of the truth the Warrens possessed. The current generation was soft, unprepared for the raw, visceral horror. They sought comfort in skepticism, or they dabbled, foolishly, in rituals they did not comprehend. Unwittingly, some even widened the cracks. They beckoned the darkness with naive curiosity. The elemental watched this folly with growing urgency. The safeguards the Warrens had painstakingly built were crumbling. Not just physical wards, but networks of information. Lines of communication with others who understood. These too had faded with their passing. The world was fragmented, isolated. Each new incident was seen as a local problem, a freak occurrence. No one was piecing together the global tapestry of dread. The Warrens had been the central knot holding it all together. Now, the threads were unraveling fast. The tapestry was becoming a shroud. Section 6. When Shadows Walk and Breathe. The portals began to widen. No longer mere hairline cracks. They were now tears. Weeping sores on the skin of the world. In abandoned factories. In deep woods. In the basements of forgotten houses. Places where the veil was thinnest. Light from these openings was sickly. It cast no warmth, only a deeper, more profound chill. From within, sounds became clearer, not just whispers but chattering, wet, sucking noises, the dry rasp of scales. Shadows detached themselves from walls. They moved with purpose. They had depth, substance. Sometimes eyes would gleam within them, cold, unblinking. People saw them from the corners of their vision. When they turned, the shadows were gone, but the chill remained. A lingering scent of grave dirt and something else, something ancient and hungry. These were the scouts, the first explorers from the other side, testing the air, testing the resolve of a world undefended. Disappearances became more frequent, individuals, then small groups, vanishing without a trace from areas near these disturbances. The police were baffled, no clues, no ransom notes, just an eerie silence, a lingering sense of profound wrongness. Sometimes a single object would be left behind, a shoe, a locket, often smeared with a substance that was not blood, something thicker, darker. The elemental felt the life forces being drawn, siphoned into the growing maws. The emerging evil was no longer subtle, it began to touch the world. Cold spots became areas of unnatural frost. Objects moved on their own, not just small items, furniture, cars. The physical laws bent and warped around these nascent gateways. Fear was a constant companion now for those who lived near, a gnawing anxiety that ate at sanity. Sleep offered no escape, only nightmares that felt like memories of another terrible place. The world was changing. It was becoming more like the place beyond the portals. Section 7. The agony of the unheeded seer. The elemental intensified its efforts. Desperation fueled its cosmic voice. Subtle warnings had failed. Now it screamed its message. Storms raged with unnatural fury. Lightning split the sky, illuminating scenes that should not be. Faces in the clouds. Vast shadowy forms moving behind the curtain of the storm. The winds howled with words of doom. Words that resonated deep in the bones of those who heard them, yet they still did not fully comprehend. Earthquakes shook regions previously stable, not massive, destructive quakes, but unsettling tremors, deep groans from beneath the earth, as if something vast was stirring in its sleep, or trying to break free. Fissures appeared in the ground. Some glowed with that same sickly, otherworldly light, emitting the stench of the portals. The elemental used the very planet as its instrument of warning. It shook the foundations. It tore at the fabric. Still, humanity looked for rational explanations. It tried to possess, not in a demonic sense, but to imbue, to speak through a human vessel. It found minds teetering on the edge, the sensitive, the broken. For brief moments, they would speak with a voice not their own, a voice ancient and filled with terrible knowledge. They would scrawl symbols, draw maps of the abyss, but they were dismissed as mad, their words lost in the diagnosis of insanity. The elemental's frustration was a burning cold, a silent internal explosion of futility. The warnings became almost attacks, a final desperate plea. Animals, driven by its influence, would behave erratically. Flocks of birds dive-bombing cars, packs of dogs surrounding homes, howling in unison. These were not acts of malice. They were frantic signals, pointing, directing attention to the sources of the incursions. But fear overwhelmed reason. People fought back against the messengers. They killed the animals. They boarded their windows. They shut out the screaming truth. The elemental recoiled from their ignorance. Section 8. The world bleeds inhumanity. The portals were no longer hidden. They were gaping maws, pulsating wounds in the fabric of reality. They scarred landscapes. They split buildings. The sickly light spilled out, bathing everything in its alien glow. The sounds were a cacophony, screams, chitinous clicks, wet tearing noises. The stench was unbearable, a miasma of alien decay and unknown chemistries. The other side was no longer peaking. It was pouring through, a torrent of wrongness. Entities emerged. Not shadows anymore, but things with form. Forms that defied sanity. Twisted geometries of flesh and bone. Eyes that saw too much. Mouths that promised unspeakable pains and pleasures. They did not walk. They skittered. They slithered. They flowed. Their touch brought cold. A soul-deep cold that extinguished hope. They were the vanguard of a vast, hungry darkness. And they were multiplying, spreading from the portal sites like a plague. Chaos erupted. Fear became panic. Panic became madness. Communities near the portals collapsed first. People fled, carrying tales of horror that no one wanted to believe, until the horror arrived at their own doorstep. Authority crumbled. The systems of control were useless against such an enemy that did not follow rules. That did not negotiate. That only consumed. The elemental watched as the tide of human life began to recede before the alien flood. The world was bleeding, its life force drained by the open wounds. The air itself felt different, thinner, colder. The very laws of nature seemed to fray at the edges. Colors were wrong. Sounds were distorted. Sanity was a flickering candle in a rising hurricane. The Warrens' absence was now a catastrophic void. There was no one to stand against this, no one who knew how. The knowledge was buried with them, and the world was burying itself in terror and disbelief. Section 9, The Last Howl Before Oblivion. The elemental gathered its remaining energy, one final desperate cry, a psychic shockwave. It pulsed across the dying planet. It carried no words, only pure, unadulterated truth, a vision, a shared nightmare for all who still possessed a mind to receive it. They saw the source, the infinite churning chaos beyond the portals, the mindless, endless hunger that drove the invaders. They saw the ultimate fate, worlds consumed, stars extinguished, silence. It showed them the Warrens, not as saviors, but as a dam. A small, fragile dam holding back an infinite ocean of horror. And it showed the dam breaking, the first crack of their passing, the subsequent erosion of all safeguards. It showed humanity's ignorance, its willful blindness, its foolish arrogance. The vision was a mirror reflecting their own doom, a doom they had invited through inaction, through the forgetting of old warnings, through the loss of their protectors. There was no hope in this final message, no call to arms. It was too late for that. The elemental was not a savior. It was a chronicler of cosmic law, a witness to the consequences of imbalance. Its warning was a final scream, a testament to the inevitable. The terror was absolute now, the realization complete, but realization came only at the precipice of annihilation. The portals were beyond closing. The entities were beyond repelling. The world was lost. The elemental began to withdraw. Its essence recoiled from the encroaching chaos. Its duty was done. The warning had been given, ignored, but given. As the darkness rolled over the remnants of civilization, as the screams faded into the chattering of inhuman throats, the elemental's presence thinned. It dissolved back into the fabric of a universe now irrevocably scarred. Its last thought, if it could be called a thought, was a cold, hard finality. The price of ignorance is oblivion, always.